Hi, Jane here. Thanks for joining me again this week. Today I want to talk about, we're going to move on to stage 4 in our writing process, and we're going to talk about revising and editing. Now, those terms can kind of be misused and misunderstood sometimes. We're going to bring just a little bit of clarity just for the purposes of showing you where they fall in the writing process and the basics of how you do them. There's no way to put all of that information detailed in a single blog post or a single video. It's just huge. So through this coming year, we're going to be talking about smaller chunks of it and looking at it in closer angle. But for now, just in light of where it is in the writing process, once you get your first draft, that first draft is so important. Then that opens the door to begin revision work. Now, what exactly is revising? Well, revising, for purposes of what we're talking about here, let's divide this up. The difference that I want you to see for now between revising and editing is this. Revising has everything to do with making sure you have the right content, that you don't have any gaps in your writing, in the flow of your material. You make sure that everything is there. Versus editing, which we're going to say is more of the mechanics of writing. It takes you into grammar, proper usage of words, capitalization rules, using numbers correctly, that kind of thing. For sake of where we are right now, that's where we're going to leave that. So in revising, you're basically, you have a kind of a two-pronged goal in when you're talking about revising. Number one, you're in your first draft, you're looking for places where maybe the content strays away from where it needs to go. You know, rabbit trails happen when we talk, they happen when we write. And revision goes in and takes care of those rabbit trails. It does away with them. And revising also makes corrections that will strengthen the quality of the content or the flow of the read. They're just things that don't come up in the creative process. And it's very important when you're writing your first draft that we talk about this a lot, that you turn off your internal editor, that you need to turn off your internal reviser too, because the creative process needs to happen free of judgment. But when you come into the place where that's now finished and you begin to revise, then you bring a sense of judgment to it. But in that, that's not mean judgment. That's not that's not being critical. And a lot of times I think we think in terms of judgment being critical. Well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about evaluation based on the goal and purpose of your writing. Did that first draft make the grade? Did it do exactly what you meant for it to do? 99% of the time, the answer to that question, if you're honest, is, well, not exactly. Well, it did to a degree. And that's why we revise. And every writer revises. It's part of writing. It's what you do. But the reason for that is because the creative process where you're writing and pulling that draft together, you can't be creative and judge and evaluate at the same time. To me, they're two diametrically opposed forces, and they don't work at the same time. You can't be happy and sad at the same time. You can't be creative in your writing and judge it and assess it while you're doing it. It doesn't work. It will shut down the creativity. So now that we've finished the first draft and we're in the revising stage, take a break from your writing and walk away from the draft for a while. Then come back to it, reread it, reassess it. It's really good if you have someone that's close to you, that you know and trust, that you can give them a copy and let them read it, and then ask them questions. You ask them the same questions that you're asking yourself. Um, did the material does it make logical sense? Is there a flow to it? Were there places where you as a reader felt confused or misled or kind of lost? Um, ask them what the main takeaway was that they got from reading it. That's a really good question, because in the process of planning and organizing, preparing to write, you determined what you wanted, what your goal, what your purpose was in writing this piece. So ask them, what was your takeaway? That tells you whether your writing really took them where you wanted to take them, or if there was something else that got in the way, or maybe there was a bigger point. There's a point for change. There's a place where you can, bring possibly a new addition into it, and that's part of revising as well. Ask them if you've written something that is a narrative where you have characters and scenes and settings and locations and all of these things, a plot going. Ask them if if the background, if the characters, if everything, all those elements were developed well so that they were drawn in. Get their feedback, and you have to resist the temptation to take offense when someone dislikes something that you write. I mean, this is a big thing for most writers. And as you mature, you learn to not be offended. You look for that critiquing, so that it's one of the ways that we improve our writing. Oh, you didn't like that. It may be your pet thing, and you may think this is the greatest thing I've ever written. And then when someone reads it, they're like, not so much. Learn to accept that. Now, accept it graciously and thank them for it. Doesn't always mean that they're right, but if you bowl up every time somebody says something to you, then you're going to miss the valid things that would really improve your writing. So bottom line, don't do that. Listen to them and then take to heart what they say and evaluate it, see their perspective. It's so valuable to do that. Now, in the process of revising, there are some basic tools that you use, and it's really this process, to talk about the process, is quite simple. It gets very detailed, and it takes a long time to do revision work correctly and properly, and you need to not be in a rush. But you're basically going to do one of these four things. You're going to find places in your work where I need to add something. I've missed something. There's a gap. There's a thin place. I need to add. And so you find those places and you make those shallow places deeper. You bring that missing thing in to tighten up the flow. You're going to delete sometimes. And this is a hard one, but it is so important. You need to delete everything, whether it's good writing or not. If it's really good writing and you really like it, then on your computer, delete it and save it in another document, but delete it from this first draft. Your material needs to only hold that material that is directly related to what you're trying to get across. Anything else, cut it. These can be deep cuts, and writers get, like I said, you can get pet things and you really like them. They feel good on the inside of you. I don't care if you save them on some other document. Start you a scrap pile. That's what I call mine. But take them out of that piece because they don't belong there. And it may be great writing in its own, but it's detracting from what you're trying to get across. Deleting is a really big one, and it can be one of the hardest ones that you do. And then you're going to replace things. You're going to... sometimes there'll be a word that you could do a better word. So you'll replace that word with a stronger one, or a more descriptive one, or a more accurate one. Same is true with a sentence or a paragraph. You substituting different things in place of what's in there to make it more effective. The whole thing is to make the flow better, that holds the reader tighter, and make your point, make your whatever your core message, make it stronger, make it plainer. This is how you do it. And the fourth thing that you're going to do is you're going to be moving things. Now, I've done a lot of work on book manuscripts, y'all. It's where I come from. But I've worked with many where they'll write them, and that's a whole other thing as to whether you write your chapters in order or you just write them and then put them in order. And I've worked with authors both ways, but it's not uncommon in the revising stage to get to where you're reading through it and you realize, well, this whole chapter belongs over here instead of down there, or vice versa. And so you move things, you move things around. You might even move part of the plot, which is not just, paragraphs on a page, but you might move thought in your plot. You might move the whole thing around just a little bit. You're tweaking things. Why? To make it more readable, to make your point better, to be more engaging, and just a better overall read. Writers, especially with books, with anything you're writing, if you can't engage the reader, then what's the point? You're gonna, what is the point? There is no point. So those are the tools that you're going to use in revising. As opposed to editing, let's talk, like I said, these two topics are huge. But editing compared to revising, editing is more about the mechanics of your writing. You get into grammar, you get into spelling, proper capitalization, using numbers versus numerals, and putting everything in the right order. It's also about punctuation, when to use italics. There's all kinds of things involved in it, but that's the mechanical side of it. And that is very, very important. Revising, can't live without it. Editing, editing involves the mechanical part of your writing is the part that will trip up a reader, and it really reflects strongly on you as a writer. And when mistakes get through, you use the wrong, you use a wrong word. We get tripped up on you see it all the time. I edit for a living, so when I sit down and just read a news app or read something anywhere, I'll go through Facebook and just read stuff. And I'm like, oh, how does this happen? Not in friend posts, that's not what I mean, but when you're reading news pieces and things out of professional sources, and you see the wrong word usage, like you have to make the choice between two and two, or there and there and there. They're just, when those mistakes make it through to your final copy, it reflects on you, and people do notice it. They do recognize it, and it doesn't work well for you. Editing takes time. Revising takes time. Editing takes time. One of the biggest things that people do wrong, that writers do wrong, I see really two things. Number one, they get in a hurry. And you cannot hurry something like revising or editing. You just can't. And the second thing is that so many writers think they can do it all themselves. And maybe you can, but there are times when it is beneficial. I edit for a living. There are times when I get someone else to edit with me, for me, because there's safety and there's value in a second pair of eyes looking at what you're doing. There's just much value in that. And so those two, you have to watch those two things, Don't get sucked up into that. It takes time, it takes patience. None of that. Revising, you cannot revise, you cannot edit until you have a first draft to work on. Now, another tip for you is when you're doing either one of these steps now you can work with software, writing softwares, and I have no problem with that. If that's the way you're wired, go for it. But there is great value, especially for newer writers or less experienced writers, or anybody, to work on paper copies. Sometimes I work on the computer. Sometimes I just have to print it out. It's easier to find mistakes on a printed page than it is on a computer screen. It just is. Don't be afraid to print things out and work with them. You make notes to yourself. In revision, I'll have arrows going everywhere. Rewrite over. Make notes to yourself. Then go in and change your computer file. The other thing is, if you are working on the computer, and all of us pretty much do, but do not trust the spell check or the style check or the grammar check. I have caught my grammar check making mistakes right and left. It just does. There is a book that I use for the editing process, and it is called the Chicago Manual of Style. Now, there's a website. If you just go to, I think it's chicagomanualofstyle.org, you can get it online, or you can buy a hard copy book. I've got a hard copy book that I've used forever, and it's just great. You learn a whole lot doing that. You can go online and you can have access to that and more through that website. I'll put that website in my description box. But I can't remember. I think it's a $39 subscription. I don't get anything from it, but I just checked it out, and for a annual subscription, you have all of that at your fingertips online, which is nice. There's a search function to it, so it makes it pretty easy to find what you're looking for. So that's an industry standard in the publishing industry. Many writers use that, editors, revisers. So I hope this has made sense to you. I hope you get something out of it. I hope you use all of this. My goal for you in 2018, we're at the end of the year. My goal is to just see you bring your writing project to life and engage it in this process, and bring it out of the dream stage into reality. If you've got a book that you've always wanted to write, now's the time to do it. Start on it. Get started. Starting a blog, whatever your writing desire. My hope for you is that this somehow I can help trigger you into starting. You're never going to get a first draft until you start. So let's start. Let's do it. Let's finish. If you need any of my help, please contact me through my website. I am here. I have all kinds of services that can help you. I'm reasonably priced, and I want to help you any way I can. And if not, then go do it on your own, but go write. Thank you. God bless.